Today we have Miss Jenny Town, who is running the 38 North, and she has a very good relations with the EAI, and we have cooperative relations in several projects. Today, we will ask her several questions regarding North Korea and US-South Korea relations. The first about North Korea. So North Korea is conducting a series of missile tests, and I guess South Korea and US must be very much concerned about it. So how do you see the intentions behind all these test firing? And then there is a concern in South Korea. Biden administration's foreign policy priority is probably about Ukraine war, diverting the attention from East Asia or Korean Peninsula. So North Korea might be a low priority. So how do you expect North Korea in the coming month in terms of Biden administration's foreign policy agenda?
Well, I think first, thank you for having me on the show. I think it's always great to work with you and with East Asia Institute and Global NK. And so however we can cooperate is always a good thing. I think it's important to keep in mind that for North Korea to be doing the back-to-back testing that it has been doing, these technologies have been in the works for a very long time. So, it isn't like suddenly one day they decided, hey, this is a good moment, let's start testing. But this is a R&D development cycle that's been, ongoing, especially since at least January 2021, when North Korea laid out the goals for the WMD program during the 8th Party Congress. So, why they're doing them all at once, it's hard to say, and most likely there's multiple reasons as to why they're doing it and why they're doing it the way they are. My sense is there's a lot of domestic political goals that these tests serve, especially in the idea of Kim Jong Un being able to accomplish goals that he set at the beginning of his 10th year in power, at a time when the economy is not doing so well, and when the social situation, the domestic situation, it doesn't look very promising, since there's, Kim Jong Un and North Korea has no control over the global pandemic and how long that's going to take for them to be able to open their borders again. So this gives, Kim Jong Un, some concrete, tangible successes against the plan that he set in January 2021, that he can claim as, a function of his leadership. How effective that is in, compelling the people, is questionable. Certainly the people don't care as much about the success of missile tests as they do, resuming business and resuming market activity and food situation and things like that. But again, it really does help feed into this persona of being someone who is able to accomplish things even in difficult times. But obviously there's a lot of other political considerations going on as well, including rising US-China competition, meaning it's much harder for the China and US to come to agreement on how to deal with North Korea as well. So unlike 2017, when there was reasons for the US and China to cooperate on North Korea, and China was willing to do more than it was even comfortable doing at certain times for the benefits of US-China cooperation, that political environment is gone. And so what you've seen instead is, China and Russia continue to advocate for sanctions relief for North Korea for humanitarian and livelihood purposes, even while North Korea is doing these missile tests. How far that patience and that willingness to remain, on the side of North Korea in that aspect is, I think, very unclear. And what we're seeing at the UN Security Council is a lot of debate going on where there is sort of still universal condemnation of North Korea's actions, but again, a real disagreement on how to respond to them. And so I think in the US and in South Korea and Japan, there's, obviously a push to impose new punishments, especially for the ICBM, the resumption of ICBM testing. But outside of unilateral actions, we're not going to get the same sort of international response that we got in the past. So it's a very different political environment now in which North Korea is doing this. And certainly the South Korean election, or the South Korean inauguration of President-elect Yoon is coming up. How much of this is geared towards the inauguration and the new administration, I think is really questionable, because again, these moves have been going on, been intensely going on since January, even before the elections, before it was clear who was going to be the winner. I think it's mainly, there's also US ROK joint military exercises coming up. There's a lot of different factors that really play into the decision-making of basically what comes next and when it might come.
Thank you. Very good points about the North Korea's intentions and changing international environments surrounding North Korean nuclear problem, inter-Korean relations, and US, North Korea, possibly future environments for resuming negotiations. Thank you very much. The second question is about, as you just mentioned, the inauguration of new President Yoon Suk-yeol, and there will be a summit meeting between Biden and Yoon just 10 days after inauguration. That's very early. And I guess that because President-elect Yoon mentioned many times that the ROK-U.S. alliance will be the central axis of his foreign policy in general. So there might be high expectation about more close U.S.-South Korea relations. So how do you expect President Yoon's foreign policy the coming summit meeting?
I think we've seen a lot of talking points about where the Yoon administration hopes to go, especially in further developing and deepening U.S. ROK ties. I think this has been largely welcomed from Washington as a way to repair some of the mistrust that is, that has grown over the past 5 years between Trump and between Moon, and some of the signaling that happened in the media instead of behind closed doors. I think there was a lot of kind of missteps and miscalculations that went on throughout that period that we're hoping to move away from and back to a more closer cooperation, especially deepening. I know in South Korea, there's a lot of expectations of deepening economic relations as well, as part of a larger strategy of not only for the alliance itself, but in terms of being able to reduce some of the dependence on China and reduce some of China's influence in the region overall. Yeah, 10 days after inauguration is very soon. I think there's going to be a lot more, symbolic value to this summit than it is like a real substantive meeting that's going to take place. But I think it does show that, despite what's going on in Russia, the South Korea and the North Korea issue, the Korean Peninsula, is not a low priority, but it does matter. And we are, the US is very concerned about what's happening in Asia. They're very concerned about what's happening on the Korean Peninsula. And should be able to walk and chew gum at the same time, as we say. So I do think, yeah, the expectations might be high, but I think it's largely a symbolic meeting this early in the new administration to try and get off on the right foot.
Thank you. That's a very good point. And also there is a public opinion in South Korea. The summit meeting, in some sense, should be symbolic because we have to work on the real agendas as time goes on. And we have many issues to deal with, like, China and North Korea after the summit meeting. So we have to be prepared for the series of the relations with surrounding powers as well. Okay, and so far, you're very famous in South Korea. You've been running 38 North very successfully. So we want to know how is the agenda North Korea reflected in policy institutions in Washington, D.C. or in the U.S. general? And how do you feel the future, how those institutions will deal with North Korean issue? And you know very well what's happening in South Korea in terms of policy institutions and think tanks. How do you expect or give us some advice about South Korea's think tank in making relations with U.S. institutions in the future?
I think in Washington, there's always more interest in Korean Peninsula issues when Korean Peninsula issues are more visible on the global stage. So when North Korea is testing, there's definitely more events around, there's more research around, there's more outreach around Korean Peninsula issues in general, not just North Korea. So I think it really does, it does highlight the importance of the Korean Peninsula to regional security, to U.S. interests in Asia, as well as to our allied relations as well, and the rising challenges and concerns that come with the changing security environment. So I think you will see a large focus, even though DC policy circles tend to be very focused on China and great power competition. North Korea's actions and continued, provocative behavior is a real manifestation of what happens when we get too focused on great power competition, and don't deal with the details of the individual relationships and the bilateral relationships in the region. So I think you will see a lot more of this, looking at the strategic environment as a function of how it affects Korean Peninsula, or how the Korean Peninsula affects the strategic environment as well. And I think that's sort of the direction of where policy research is going, in order to better align with US interests and US priorities, as well as just the rising challenges that it poses to regional security and global security. In terms of cooperation between US and ROK think tanks, I think there is actually a lot of cooperation that does go on. We do see there's several delegations will come through, I think both Seoul and Washington, from different think tanks and different government agencies. And I hope that will continue. I hope they'll pick up now that the pandemic is easing off and pandemic restrictions are easing off. But I think actually even during the pandemic, being able to do more online and having the virtual environment be more broadly accepted has opened a lot of cooperation and opportunities for cooperation. I think DC has gotten used to doing evening events in order to be able to do more with our South Korean partners. But in policy circles, we're always looking for ways to highlight South Korean voices and perspectives on the region, so that it isn't, fully dominated by US narratives across the political spectrum, but, it includes includes our allies in the region and how they're thinking about the situation. And the more I think we can get of Korean perspectives into English, to help, the global community better understand the concerns and the threat perceptions and the challenges that we're dealing with collectively, I think will be beneficial to all.
Yeah, those are very good points. Actually, what Global NK is doing is to make the South Korean opinions known in English, not just to the United States, but to globally. So probably with more help with 38 North, I think Global NK can do better works. Thank you very much. Thank you. Very helpful comments on various issues, and hopefully we'll continue online and also offline meetings as well. And we hope we have you again in the future. Thank you very much, Jenny.
All right, thanks, Jason.